Hello and welcome to Ben and Curt Till It Hurts, the culture cast caught at the crossroads of curation and castration. Once again, emphasis on the castration. Please do make sure that you understand what this podcast is going to be like, because we are talking about Eraserhead, David Lynch's first film.
Sure are. I'm glad you got the intro right, because...
Was that right?
I think that was right.
Yeah.
And when you said you weren't sure if it was going to be right, I was like, I should just fucking screech if he gets it wrong. Like
awesome. Again! Do it again!
That'll be how he'll know he didn't do it right, if I just screech like a monkey.
Oh, then I'm glad that I got it right that time, too.
Me too.
Yeah.
So.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I've literally just been playing Fallout in all my free time. That's about it. Yourself?
True believers, go visit our Fallout New Vegas episode. It's a pretty good one. Yep. Yep. I'm doing good too. The baby's doing well.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yep. I haven't had to cut the egg open yet. We'll get to that.
Yeah, it was such a weird coincidence that I found my used copy of Eraserhead when I did, because I shouldn't have picked it on purpose. Like, I feel like there's a lot of new dad thoughts going on in Eraserhead that are like, that's not fair to me.
Something drove you towards that movie,
I know.
man. Something drove you towards that movie.
I felt...
that was not random.
For a second, I was like, I hope I didn't subconsciously pick this. But then I realized today, I was like, no, I bought Eraserhead because there was finally a used one. This is not my fault.
Something drew your eyes towards that, man.
Somebody else sold Eraserhead because of this, and I was there to pick up the pieces. I'm sure you watched it again.
I did. I watched it twice. I watched it once last week, and then I watched it again last night. And you literally watched it 10 minutes before I got here.
Yeah, I got home, and I said, there's exactly enough time to watch Eraserhead before Ben gets here. And there was. It's a tight 90 minutes. Yeah,
it feels like about 3 times that long.
Yeah, it feels like it takes all day to watch, and then it just like sticks with you for like a week or so the first time, and then I've become kind of desensitized to it. I can walk away from it a little easier now.
There are parts that still get me.
Certainly.
Definitely.
We'll talk about it, but I think there's really just one part that's still like like I just don't like it.
All right. Well, we'll get to those. Yeah. Let's do quick intro stuff, right?
Yeah.
David Lynch was a painting student, right? He was a student of art, or he was trying to be a student of art. He was interested in painting. And he ended up in the 70s making these like animated paintings, and that got him sort of he got a toe into film through doing that. And then he got these grants from the American Film Institute to make a film, which was called Grandmother, right?
Yep.
And then he submitted Grandmother and a script to get funding for this other movie called like Garden something.
It was I don't remember the name of it. It was something to do with a man who was growing he had a parasitic plant thing.
It was some other movie. It ended up falling apart because the people who were providing production money kept trying to inflate it and get more and more dialogue into it. And David Lynch kind of just walked away. He was like frustrated with the whole process. So then, seemingly as some kind of apology, I believe the American Film Institute gave him money to make this other movie that he wanted to make. This was called Eraserhead, and he spent 5 years making it off and on.
It took a long time, and they kept running out of money and having troubles. The first thing that I thought about when I learned that it took this long to make, I was like, Jack Nance had that haircut for 5 fucking years.
Hell yeah, he did.
Can you imagine?
That's awesome.
That's that's just beyond dedication. That's like real friendship. That's like make your friend walk around like that for 5 years.
Well, I got the sense from the article that I read about the making of this of Eraserhead that everyone was quite dedicated to the artistic vision that David Lynch emanated, because it doesn't sound like he ever articulated a complete artistic vision for the piece. But just from the way he conducted himself and the way he spoke about it, it sounds like you could really get the sense that he knew exactly what he wanted this thing to look and feel like. And that seems to have engendered an enormous amount of loyalty and patience from everybody on the crew. It's like the opposite of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
You hear about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's like, everybody was miserable, everybody hated me, and I did horrible things to all of them. On this movie, it's like, well, David Lynch was not that weird. He wore 3 ties, but whatever. Yeah. He was just this nice guy, very well-mannered, and we all enjoyed him, and we all enjoyed the work we were doing, and we all worked really hard to make a really good movie, and we all walked away from it feeling good.
And he was kind of in a... Well, I was going to say he was like Tarantino, but I guess Tarantino is more like him, where he used a lot of the same actors throughout the rest of the things that he made, and I assume that's because he had pretty good working relationships with them.
Yeah.
So...
Do we want to... What should we say to the different types of audiences that could be listening to this? First, if you haven't watched Eraserhead,
you should probably go watch Eraserhead.
You should watch Eraserhead. It's 90 minutes. You can rent it for like $4 on Amazon. Do you like Eraserhead?
I love it.
I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. It's not as impenetrable as its reputation would suggest. It's gonna make you feel something. Yeah. Right?
And the first time you see it, you'll probably feel some things you don't like.
You're going to feel some unwelcome feelings. You may find in the days following watching Eraserhead that memories you haven't thought of in a long time kind of bubble to the surface in a way that makes you a little uncomfortable. Just roll with it, all right? It's gonna be good. It's gonna be okay. Eraserhead is not... It's a terrifying movie, but it's not a dangerous movie.
So I think first I would like to hear from you some initial thoughts. Just overall, what do you think of Eraserhead? What is it in general that you like so much about it?
I like Eraserhead because it is not like any other movie I've ever seen, but it's like a different way that movies could be. Typically in a movie, people act normal like people act. In Eraserhead, that goes completely out the window. People act like anywhere between like hysterical, deranged mental patients and like soap opera actors, or completely flat affect. Yeah, just deadpan. Right? There's such this. It's something that you don't see in a lot of other movies. But it goes beyond that. It's not just that it's unique; it's that it is executed well on every conceivable level. And that makes me... I think we talked about that with Tarantino a little bit. How like you just trust the filmmakers. Yeah. When you're watching Eraserhead, at least if you're like me, it's executed with an enormous amount of vision and style, and it communicates itself with clarity, but without hitting you over the head with anything. Certainly without hitting you over the head with anything. It's very subtle in its own way as well. What do you like about Eraserhead?
Initially, what I liked so much about the film was that and I may have mentioned this at the end of our episode last week, but it feels like I'm watching a nightmare. I'm always impressed every time I watched it that like to the extent that I almost didn't know that that's what my nightmares felt and looked like until I saw it awake, and then it just has this very just uneasy, surreal horror and dread that's kind of just permeated throughout the whole film. And that was always the big draw to it, that I just was amazed that David Lynch was able to make a nightmare. And I don't think any other movie maker has ever been able to do that. In that
David
way.
Lynch does it a couple more times in his career. There's at least Blue Velvet's a nightmare, Lost Highway's a nightmare, Mulholland Drive is a nightmare.
And I just think how special it is to be able to take something that everybody experiences, nightmares, and then just show it to you in a way that you didn't know could be shown. It's just at the very root of what your nightmares are, or mine anyway, that's Eraserhead.
Yeah. David Lynch has an intuitive skill with symbols, that's the thing about trying to translate a nightmare, or even trying to tell someone else about your dreams, is that you don't know why your dreams make you feel the way they do, because dreams operate on a purely symbolic level. There's no sense of logic whatsoever in a dream. But if you can... And it sounds from what I've read of interviews with David Lynch that he he doesn't take the images that pop up in his mind and try to translate them linguistically before putting them on screen. It sounds like he works in a field of pure image, which may be why he's able to get that nightmarish effect so keenly drawn on the screen.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I think the other thing, as I've been thinking about this movie and watching it a lot over the past few weeks, I've mentioned kind of before that when we watch movies, you and I tend to approach them differently sometimes. I am fully capable of like turning off the analytical part of my brain, and I can just enjoy a movie for just exactly what's given to me, and if I want to, I'll look deeper into it. And I think now that I've considered that with this movie, what I like about it so much is that I can watch this movie either way and enjoy it just as much. I can take it as a literal, this is just what it's like here, this happened, and that you just have to deal with that. And I think it's a great film. And then if I say, it's really easy to watch this movie and think, this means something, this means something. Everything in this movie is there on purpose, and it means something, and I just have to figure out what it is. And I can attribute meanings to those symbols and just watch it as a movie that's a metaphor about the fear of fatherhood, and it's still a great movie. And I just love that however I approach this movie, I enjoy it just as much, I think. Yeah.
And I think approaching a piece of art both ways simultaneously is the key to unlocking what any piece of art has to offer you. And it's tough, right? That's a hard skill to develop, but I've found it very worthwhile to try to always be watching things or reading things or viewing things or whatever from both perspectives, from like the reaction, the pure sensory reactions that this gives me of surprise or excitement or sadness or whatever. Those are one level. That's like the body level, but there's also the analytic, symbolic mind level of it. And if you integrate both of those levels, then you have what your interpretation of the piece of art is. But let's actually talk about what happens in Eraserhead real quick. I think that might be a good exercise.
Yeah.
Right?
In our movie reviews, we should talk about what happens in the movie.
Let's, because we've thrown around some good broad overview stuff, and I'm ready to start digging into this because it is a dense and like fun piece to talk about. So let's just try to give a summary of some things that happen more or less in Eraserhead. All right, we open on Jack Nance's beautiful face, sideways in the frame, with the planet going into and out of it. And this, I interpret this as a dream sequence. Yeah. Right? Do you see it the same way? Yeah. This is where our character begins. But it's also a sex scene, weirdly, right? Because the man in the planet pulls some levers, and then a sperm flies into a pool of water. And...
Basically, for every character, I'm interested in your thoughts on that character.
Yeah.
And because the man in the planet is one of the most interesting characters to me, because I think it's a little, I don't know, it's one of the most abstract ideas, and kind of maybe up for interpretation, maybe not though, because I mean I feel like on some level it like represents God, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's just terrifying that this might be getting a little off topic, but in this world that we're quickly introduced to, this just desolate, metallic, industrial, abandoned world, that it's even reached a point where even God is just a man that sits in a shitty wooden chair and cranks on big steam-powered levers. And
I think it's God, but I think it's closer to the Son. I think it's closer to Christ than to, say, the Father or the Holy Spirit, if you're going to use the like triumvirate formulation of God. I think that the man in the planet is Henry's ideal version of himself. And he lives in this terrible shack, and he's all diseased, and he's covered with these like horrible boils, because he's neglected. Henry has not done any work to nurture his ideal vision of himself. So he's kind of ignored on this like desolate planet where nothing grows. And it seems like as like a last ditch effort, he pulls those levers to make the sperm come out and enter the uterus, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, what do you think of? Do we want to keep going with the summary? Or do we want to like?
Yeah, let's just keep on.
Okay.
In there.
All right, because I'm glad we talked about the man in the planet. I like that guy.
Yeah.
Took me a couple times to kind of figure out what was going on at the beginning there, but
even, you know, when we talk about the symbols in this movie, that is one of the first things that I looked at that I kind of said, everything in this it means something. This was a choice that was made. Mm-hmm. Why is he covered in boils? Why is his hair greased back? And why does it really let you, it really, maybe not, but I felt like it takes care in showing you that his hair is greased back. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the weird thing about the choices made in this movie, is that it feels like everything you see, David Lynch is holding your hand like, did you see that thing I just did? Uh-huh. That's a little bit weird, wasn't it? What do you think that means?
What do you think of that?
Like,
anyway, we're moving on to the
next...
on,
though. Think about it. Think about it.
Yeah.
Questions at the end.
Yeah. The hair thing is interesting because he's the opposite of Henry's hair.
Right? That's true.
Henry's hair is completely out of control, whereas the man in the planet's hair is slicked back and very controlled, and he takes great care.
But yeah, let's continue.
We experience a birth from the perspective of the child. Right? We move once those levers are pulled, and I believe they call them fetuses internally during the movie. The weird little sperm things. I always think of them as sperms because that's what they look like to me. Yeah. They've got big heads and weird tails. Which those tails, I only learned this today. Those tails on those weird little sperm things were actual umbilical cords.
Oh, okay. I was reading a little bit of the urban legends behind his baby that people speculating what effects were used to create that. But we'll wait for that.
We'll get to the baby.
Well,
all right.
So initially we see Jack Nance, that's the actor's name.
Yep,
Henry. Just kind of like scream in weird agony, but you don't hear it, and then that's the child being born, apparently. Yeah. And what's your take on the first shots of him walking through the wasteland?
I think they're hilarious. They're hilarious because it's like, it almost looks like he's doing his version of hiking. Like he goes into this, he goes into this weird building, and there are these mountains of dirt everywhere. Like they're little piles. They're little piles of dirt, and he walks up one, and then kind of walks into a little divot, and then up another one, and. Yeah, and when you find out later that he's on vacation, and that's what he does when he's on vacation, it makes it much funnier.
The beginning of the film is really... There's a lot of, like, weird, dry, comedic moments. That's definitely one of them. Just, he's walking through and he has a package, and then he... Instead of just, like, walking in a straight line, he kind of rambles around up over little dirt mounds, and... Then he steps in a puddle, and
seemingly on accident, but just because he wasn't paying any attention.
Yeah, and there was one more thing that I thought. Oh, when he gets to his apartment, that's where he's walking to. He presses the button to open the elevator, and he gets in it, and it takes like probably 5 seconds longer than you would think it would.
Yeah, the camera cuts back to make it feel longer. It cuts back to a wider angle view to make it feel longer.
And it just I laugh. You know, I've read it that other people have that same reaction of it's just like, why does it take so long for that elevator door to close?
And because the sound of the elevator door closing is like a rock rolling away from a tomb. It's like this scraping sound that you...
The funny thing about those elevators, and a lot of I feel like they must have just been like, you know, there was a guy on each side of that. Like they move very awkwardly.
It's
and
total stage prop. It doesn't look mechanical. It looks organic in a way. Yeah, yeah. So he goes up to his sad apartment.
Yep.
Right. Where in the hallway, the woman across the hall tells him that he's got a call from someone. And he goes into his apartment. Or she tells him that he's got a call from what's her name?
Mary.
he's like, okay. He goes into his apartment. Turns out Mary has a baby, right? But I'm getting a little fucking ahead of ourselves. Mary's invited him over for dinner.
That I find that is that's a good example of it, is there's such an uneasiness in that film that even the characters feel, which is weird. I mean, it's just weird that they also acknowledge that you are feeling this feeling of uneasiness, because in these scenes where he's just kind of walking around, he always has this uncomfortable look on his face, and he'll look behind him, and he hears dogs bark, and he looks left and right. He
kind of trips over the railway a little
bit.
And
he's just always uneasy. And then when the woman peeks out to be like, hey, Mary called and invited you for dinner, he's just like, yeah? Like, it's just like, why are you talking to me? And like, why would I want to know that? When she has no idea. Like, she's like, hey, I'm just giving you a message. And he's like, yeah, so? Like, it's just such a funny, like, what the fuck is this world? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, a lot of enigmatic stuff. And it's all in black and white, too.
Yeah.
The beautiful black and white photography. He takes out the picture of Mary, and he looks at her body first, and then he puts her head back on her body because he's ripped it in half.
Yeah.
Which is such a great way of letting you know that, okay, this relationship used to exist, but it does not anymore. But he still has the picture, even though it's ripped.
Did you notice that there's a bowl of water in
There's a bowl of water with change in it.
With coins, and he throws some...
It's the little wishing well that he has in his own apartment. You gotta have those little things to keep you happy. You know?
Even the making note he takes his wet sock off and throws it on top of the radiator to dry it back out.
Yeah.
Which I think is a little foreshadowing that the radiator will kind of become helpful to him in other ways.
Yes, helpful is an interesting word.
So you just get to view his weird, sad apartment.
His sad life. Yeah, his sad, lonely life. And he eventually goes over to Mary's house for dinner. And it's just the most terrifying domestic nightmare that you've ever encountered.
But, weirdly, before I say this is not in like a literal way, but as far as David Lynch portraying my nightmares without me knowing they needed to be portrayed, not with my wife, that's disclaimer, but I have gone to like meet people I've been dating's parents, and emotionally it's very much like
feels
that.
Exactly
I've had
like
some
that.
Not great, like, why am I here? What the fuck is going on? So favorite moments from visiting the
first thing that always makes an impression on me is the dogs.
It's so gross.
And the sound effects. We should mention, of course, that the sound effects were paid a special attention to in this film, and it really shows. You feel the sound effects.
A sad mom dog with too many puppies.
Like 4 or 5 puppies suckling at her.
Like, angrily.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you kind of get the sense of what Mary's going through. It's a little bit of foreshadowing. I mean, maybe this is only because I knew that there's a baby in the movie, but it's like, is this what motherhood, is this the vision of family that Mary has been presented with? Is just like, yeah, you have 4 or 5 kids and then they literally suck the life out of you.
Well, one thing that I noticed just this time when I watched it, and I've watched it quite a bit recently, that every weird thing that happens in their apartment is a very, like, unnatural depiction of life. There's from the weird suckling dogs just, like, draining the life out of their mother instead of, like, happily gaining nutrients from the mother. They're just ruining the mother. There's the grandmother that smokes the cigarette in the chair that doesn't move.
The grandmother that tosses the salad with the hand-over-hand assistance of
really We'll call back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, another great film that depicts a horrifying visit to family.
And I guess the man-made chickens would be the biggest. Like,
they're man-made.
They're man-made. Cut them like a regular chicken.
Yeah.
Fucking terrifying. And
great.
Even little, the mother tries to kiss Henry at just every possible interaction. Mary has like a weird little seizure thing.
Mary has a weird seizure during the terrible conversation that Henry and her mother have.
And then her mother has one at dinner.
Yeah.
Like every interaction here is just like goes against what life is supposed to be like. And I thought that was interesting. I just noticed that like each one of these is like a weird, not good way of living.
And the set design is so perfect. There's like pipes just openly in the middle of the house,
which is really great and just drives home this just industrial area these people live in. And then one thing that I thought was interesting was the father mentions being a plumber.
Yeah, his line is, I remember this because it hits me every time. He's like, I've laid every pipe in this damn town. Yeah. People think pipes just grow in their houses. They don't. And what's the other thing that he says? I've watched this neighborhood turn from pasture into the hellhole it is now. And as he says hellhole it is now, you hear like a train passing by in the background.
And that, I really like that because it shows that it hasn't been like this for long. Like, this isn't just a weird, this is what it's like where they live. This is just real life. This is a very concrete thing that has happened in this area.
Everyone is like trying to imitate a life that they once lived.
Yep.
Yeah. But utterly failing because the whole canvas upon which they're supposed to live this life has been ruined. And nothing grows there anymore.
It's interesting to see that I'm gonna have to edit like every second of this out because I'm pausing so much. But
it's okay. Take your time. Formulate.
When he says that everyone thinks that pipes just grow, but they don't, I think it's interesting because I almost think maybe they do just grow. Like
it does kind of seem like they just grow. Yeah.
You know, even to the point where, you know, if you interpret the man in the planet as God or whatever, even he is at a point now where he is using these mechanical levers to control everything, and maybe that's why he's not doing such a good job, because it's a lot harder to use all these archaic levers to control things. And I think that maybe they've put themselves in this world, like, you know, in Henry's apartment there's a window that's bricked up behind it, so there used to be a window. You know, and
there is a window again by the end.
They wouldn't have. Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, he looks out the window to watch the murder in the alley.
Oh, I knew that, but I never even noticed that the bricks were gone.
Yeah. I think they are. I might be making that up, but I'm pretty sure that's how it goes down.
So, I just thought that was an interesting thing, that this way they've established life has kind of outgrown what any of them are capable of doing, and now they're stuck there trying to mimic this lifestyle with this horrible impending mechanical hell just like coming in around them.
Yeah.
Equally terrifying. One more scary thing in this movie.
Back to the dinner scene. Henry, the father, Mr. X, I guess we should say, is his actual credited name. Mr. and Mrs. X and Mary X is the family's name. Mr. X can no longer cut these birds, or can no longer carve the dinner, because his whole left arm has no feeling left in it, and he's worried he's going to cut himself. Yeah. So he gives the job to Henry, and Henry has like the knife in his hand and the fork in his hand, and he thinks about it for a second, and then he kind of turns towards Mr. X and is like, do I just cut him like regular birds? And Mr. X like flinches away as though Henry's going to stab him in the arm with the knife. It's one of those great moments that I just love. That's like, Henry is so ill at ease in his environment that nobody knows how to act around him.
I love that particular thing too, because I've always viewed it as a custom. You know, when you go to Thanksgiving or you go to someone's house and you have a turkey, usually the head of the household,
the patriarch
carves the
matriarch
bird. And then, so to go to visit someone's house and they offer to let you carve the bird, I view that as like a nice gesture of, you know, welcoming, and you're part of our family now. And even, you know, we're going to depend on you for things now.
It's a responsibility. The Mr. X is trying to pass down the patriarchal lineage to Henry.
And then Henry doesn't know how to do
Fucking fails so hardcore. He doesn't cut the bird.
And then the bird pukes blood out of it.
Out of its weird mouth hole.
All over the table. And
Yeah.
then Mom has a seizure.
And its little legs move.
Yeah,
its little arms.
Still alive. So, quick little tidbit, though, that I noticed immediately. Mary's mother is... I don't know, her name is Charlotte Stewart. I was randomly looking at her right
Mary's
here.
character, right?
Oh, is it? Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Jean Bates is Mrs. X.
Mm-hmm.
She has pretty much... This is I need to just befriend this woman because she has pretty much in her entire filmography, aside from like some TV work, basically the only movies she's appeared in is Eraserhead and then Tremors 1 and 3.
What?
Right?
That's amazing.
3 of my all-time favorite movies.
What a career, yeah.
If I could only pick 3 movies to be in, I think it would probably be Eraserhead and then Tremors 1 and 3.
I can't imagine what role you would play in Eraserhead, man. Like, I can't imagine what we would add. What character would we add?
I would be the guy that owns the eraser store.
You'd be the guy that owns the eraser store? I could see you being the bum on the bench as well, who sees Henry's head fall through in the... Or you're the kid that grabs Henry's head and runs to
I'm definitely that kid. I'm an opportunist.
You're a dream figure in Eraserhead, yeah.
So we learn at their house that...
Mrs. X pulls Henry to the side and confronts him. Did you have sexual intercourse with my daughter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the hardest things to hear in that is when she says there's a baby and then Mary cries and says they don't even know if it is a baby. And I was like, oh, what the fuck?
It was born premature, but it is a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange because up until that point, I didn't really grasp how much time had passed. You don't learn much about their relationship except that they're not in one, and then he's a little confused when he gets invited to dinner.
Yeah, so, he says, like, you never come around anymore outside the house.
And he even said, before that, he says, like, I didn't even know if you wanted me to come. Like,
yeah, well, you get the sense that she retreated from him once she found out she was pregnant.
Yeah.
Which totally happens. That's what I would do if Henry impregnated me.
I probably wouldn't invite him over for dinner.
I'd fucking run. I would get out of there.
I'd go it alone.
Yeah.
So...
Maybe that's being unfair to Henry. All right, we'll talk about whether or not Henry's a good guy later. But after the dinner,
we just have this. His apartment, his sad little apartment, is like a 1-room studio.
It's not fit for one human life, and now there are 3 inside of it.
Mary and their baby,
because they have to get married, right?
Yes, they have to.
And what is? Oh my god, I can't even remember what they say to each other, but he's like, I wouldn't mind marrying you, or some fucking half-hearted bullshit like that. But then ultimately, yes, they are married. They're living a familial nightmare inside of that apartment.
And we are introduced to their baby.
The baby. The centerpiece of the movie. One of the most incredible props ever made for any film.
And this was in 1977.
Yeah.
And to this day, it's like, almost, 50 years later?
Yeah.
40 years? And people still aren't sure how it was made or what was used to make it.
They think it's like a mixture of puppetry and stop motion.
I was reading on Wikipedia that there were some real, like, using the I was going to say uterus, but I meant umbilical cord. Mm-hmm. There are, people think that it was part like lamb, like a lamb fetus, or the skinned rabbit. Like, so it's very possible, now that I know that there were real umbilical cords in this movie, that just adds to this, that David Lynch has never said what it's made of, and the effects director was never involved enough to know, and then won't tell anything about it because
everyone had to sign a release, I think.
Did they?
To make it so that they would never... No, we know there is puppetry involved in this effect. But the nature of that
I wish
puppetry...
it were a living.
They actually created this baby in a tube.
So it's this just...
It's a clone of David Lynch.
Puppeteered meat puppet. Yeah. That is pretty fucking horrific to look at.
It looks incredible.
Yeah.
I'm flabbergasted at how great this thing looks. It's a triumph of engineering, puppetry.
Yeah.
The eyes move. the mouth moves. It's
the tongue sticks out.
Unbelievably good.
I had also read, that just reminded me, I had read that each part of it could move independently. The head, the neck, not the arms, but the head and the neck and the tongue and the eyes. It could all move independently. And just still horrifying to look at.
But kind of cute, too.
I was going to say...
kind of cute in its own way.
I wouldn't go as far as to say that I found it cute, but I would go as far to say, I guess maybe this is cuteness, because there's a very strong sense of feeling empathy for it. You feel very bad for this little critter.
I will say that, Megan, take the headphones off. Don't listen to this part. It genuinely reminded me of my baby.
Did it?
Yeah, every time I watch this movie, I kind of get a sense of, like, especially when I watch some of the mistreatment of the baby later on, I have a very strong negative reaction to that, because I do, in some way, I identify in this baby the same kind of, like, dependence, but also an overwhelming sense of a complete personality.
Yeah. That
I identify in my own child. And makes Eraserhead kind of an uncomfortable watch for me at times.
Even for me, like I said, I've become desensitized to a lot of it, but there are things that I still find horrific and hard to watch in this movie. Are even in that scene, there's little bits of it, just mistreatment of their child. And the very first thing I think I noticed was she's trying to feed it, and it keeps moving its mouth, and she kind of just shoves the spoon in its mouth. Yeah. And then it starts sticking its tongue out and throwing up. And that it gets worse than that.
Yeah.
And that...
Well, I would say there are four main moments of mistreatment of the child in this movie. And the first one is the force feeding at the beginning. And they amp up over time as well.
And so, this, up to this point, is probably the most concrete the plot is. Like,
yes,
this happens, then this happens, and then they're home living together.
Yeah, and then things fall apart.
And the thing that causes it to fall apart is that it's such a sad shot. They're both lying in bed together, facing the same way with their eyes open. And
we skipped something, but describe this part. We skipped the part where he goes to get the mail, and he finds the little box with the worm inside of it.
Yes.
And then he brings the box back up to the apartment, and Mary asks him if there is anything in the mail, and he says no. He lies about it. That's important. But then, yes.
Actually, I completely forgot about that part.
Oh, the worm's very important.
And so they're both lying, facing the same way, pretending that they're asleep.
Oh, I hate this shot.
Just both miserable. And with that same patented look of just fear and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And then the baby can't stop crying. It's just... and it wails, too. It's just and you feel bad for it. And, I wouldn't say that Mary snapping is what causes everything to start to unravel, because I think Spencer's character is kind of like a passive shithead that is not a supportive character. No. So it's almost like genius in a way that Lynch like, if you had to point to when the first thing really goes wrong, you would have to say, I think, it's when Mary can't sleep and she freaks out and she leaves Spencer and the baby in the apartment and goes back to her parents' house. Mm-hmm. But really, that's not the first thing. The first thing that goes wrong is that Spencer is not a good dad, doesn't want to be a good dad, feels very trapped in this situation that he's got himself in.
Well, okay, so let's pick apart this scene a little bit more, because there's a little bit more there. And sorry, I'm gonna cough. I'm gonna fucking clear my throat. Take a drink. Talk for a second.
Sure. I'll just edit this out. I don't need to talk.
That's probably better. No, leave it in now. I think that was good problem solving. Great teamwork. Henry goes down and gets the worm out of the mailbox, lies about it. Late at night, they're both laying in bed. He steps out of bed, opens up the box, opens up a little kind of display box, opens the doors on it, takes the worm out, places it in there, closes the doors, lays back down, and makes an awkward pass at Mary, right? There's that great shot of them lying next to each other. Mary has just this look of dread on her face and a look of despondency. And Jack has this look of, not Jack Nance is the actor.
Yeah.
Henry has a look of like tentative interest on his face, but also fear, right? And he reaches his hand out and touches her, and she shudders. She jolts. She's clearly disgusted by his touch, and his hand retreats. Right, and they're both just laying there miserable. And then the baby starts screaming, or maybe the baby's screaming the whole time. I don't know, but the baby screaming becomes the centerpiece. She gets out of bed, screams at the baby to shut up.
Yeah, that's also really hard.
That's hard to watch. I would say that's the second big moment of mistreatment in the movie. She screams at the baby to shut up, and then the baby does shut up. She lays back down, but it just starts screaming again. Yeah.
And I think, too, that when I watch this from, trying to look at this as a metaphor for Lynch's fear about fatherhood.
I want to say that I don't think that this movie is accurate to what David Lynch's experience of fatherhood was.
Okay.
I think he's capturing feelings that he maybe felt a little bit, but he sees it with too much clarity, I think, for it to have been his actual experience. So I want to try not to conflate like the voice of the film with the voice of the filmmaker, because Lynch is very good and seems to be very careful about separating those two things out. But sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine.
That is a personal point of mine.
I don't have any children, but I can't help but just think about how for a lot of parents that have babies that cry a lot and cry at night, the first few months or however long of parenthood, there's a lot of those just like late nights and no rest and kind of zombie autopilot mode for a little while. And I think that that just injects that into this already awful situation, and it really just there was never any hope for this to get better, I think, but then there's just this constant nagging of there's this thing that we can't ignore, and we have to address it, and we can't deal with this. Mm-hmm. And it just makes it that much more effective in the movie, because you're already just like on pins and needles from all the weird anxiety, awful things that are going on around him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mary leaves. When the baby starts crying again, Mary gets up and says, "I'm leaving. I can't deal with it. I'm going home. I need a good night's sleep. You take care of the baby while I'm gone, and you better take real good care of it. You better take real good care of things." I don't think that's her exact line, but that's her. She also
gist
makes
of what she says.
Note to mention that you're on vacation.
Yeah.
You take care of it.
You can deal with this.
And I think that this is a pretty good point in the film. Everything after this is a lot more surreal and a lot more up for interpretation.
Yeah. Well, there is, because he does try to take care of the baby, right?
Yeah.
Like the baby stops crying. Then he goes over and investigates, takes the baby's temperature. It's a perfect temperature. It's the correct temperature, right? But then he looks away for 1 second and looks back, and the baby is this diseased mess.
It's just covered in, like, pox.
It's covered in boils. Its mouth, like, its teeth are all broken. It's got sores in its mouth, and, like, its ears and eyes are all crusty and disgusting.
It's just screaming. Not like, I'm a sad baby, can't sleep, screaming.
It's like, I'm in pain. I'm dying. You are sick. Oh, you are sick. It's like one of the best line readings in the movie. I love it. I love this movie.
And so I'm trying to think what happens from there, because that's...
Well, from there he puts the vaporizer on.
Yeah,
right?
and he does that. He kind of tries
he's sitting by the baby.
Care of it, sits near it, and has the little vaporizer like blowing nice warm air.
Steam, yeah.
And... Okay, I'm going to have to edit a second of this out, but I'm trying to remember what actually happens after that.
Well, after that, I think he goes to sleep, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of it is a dream. Well, the lady in the radiator comes up at some point, too.
Yeah, this happens a few times. And let's talk about the lady in the radiator.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think she represents peace and freedom to Henry. She's such an inviting figure. She's got those cartoonishly, almost grotesquely big cheeks with like veins and cracks in them.
I would say they're definitely grotesque.
I would say grotesque is the right word. Yeah, yeah. And she, in probably her, not her introduction, but maybe the second time she appears, she's on this stage inside of the radiator. And the fetuses, the little sperms, fall onto the stage, and she kind of dances around to this like jaunty circus music, and she stomps on them, right? So I think that she's telling Henry, she's introducing Henry to the idea that you don't just need to deal with this. You don't need to take this responsibility on your shoulders. You just wanted to have a good time. Come on.
Yeah, and I think that. I like that because my initial reading of it was it's just where he has this real life of such very severe things going wrong and responsibility. This is just like kind of just like silly carnival music, and she's lightly dancing. There's nothing intense about it, and it just kind of to me represents this whole just distraction of just things that don't matter. It's
pure escape into momentary pleasure.
Yeah, and just, she kind of kicks the little fetuses out of the way, like, Dad, don't worry about that, and then when they kind of get to a point where they do get in her way, she just stomps on them, like it's not a big deal.
And she, like, looks like, oh, I'm doing something kind of naughty. Can you believe I just did that?
I do love, too, it's just how well this movie is shot with the lighting. The pure white paint that like blows up out of these little things when she steps on them.
Yeah,
like it's grosser that they're white than if it were like a yellow or grayish looking.
They're sperm, man.
Like
they're sperm. They contain sperm. They are sperm. They are individual sperm cells, and they contain semen. That's.
I think that now that you've said that, I really like that because that backs up the idea of like. Like you said, this isn't your responsibility. You were just having fun. Look, these things fall all the time. I step on them. I kick them out of the way. You were just trying to have a good time. And I think when we talked about it in person, I think you had said that at that point, this was before you had watched it in a long time. I think you had said that you thought the radiator represented like pornography, even though that medium wasn't really
the medium of pornography. yeah, it is weird to think of it as a medium, but it kind of is, isn't it? Yeah. It wasn't as prominent, but I think that pornography has grown into the radiator. Yeah. I don't think that the radiator was meant to represent pornography, but I think that pornography represents the same thing that the radiator represented. It's like pure escape away from your responsibility into momentary pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me sad because I was listening to that Alex Cameron album the other day, and there was a line about that really reminded me of Eraserhead that I had thought to write down, but then I forgot. Mm-hmm. But it was something to the effect of being in bed with your partner and you can't sleep, and he says something to the effect of, what's the difference between looking at the back of my eyelids or looking at a white computer screen filled with barely legal age teens? I always like when that's one of the best things I've loved about doing this podcast is we'll watch movies or listen to music or play a game, and we're thinking of it analytically so we can think of things to talk about, and then unexpected things in my life will be like, oh, that's weirdly relevant to this. Mm-hmm. Or how many times I've watched a movie or done something that reminds me of Texorcism now. I'm like, oh, that's weird. I wouldn't have expected Grandpa to be in this movie. But so we just have some radiator scenes, and I think that I don't know if that's like I don't even know if there is a this is what this means guide to Eraserhead, but
no, I think that would be impossible.
I think we're on to something.
Yeah,
I do. So that did remind me though. people have asked David Lynch questions about Eraserhead, and he's pretty adamant on not answering any interpretive questions.
Which I think is admirable.
Yeah.
He's made a movie that speaks for itself.
Yeah. And I think, too, before I had watched this movie 80 times and didn't have an understanding of it...
I fucking can't even conceive of how you watch this movie that much.
I probably make it sound like I've watched it more than I have, but
Even if it's more than, like... Is it more than 5?
It's about 5.
Okay, all right. That's okay.
Yeah, it's definitely not more than 5.
Yeah, it's definitely not more than 10 either.
That'd be weird, right?
More power to you, man. Like if you can stomach it that much, I think it's because it's so like weirdly directly relevant to my life right now that I can't. I extract. It was a very intense experience for me watching it the first time, and then the second time I was able to distance myself just enough to get a broader sense of what it was doing. But both times it's been like uncomfortable, I can't see myself watching it again anytime soon.
I wouldn't blame you, and that was one thing that I thought because I had watched it a few times before we decided to do it on the podcast, and then I watched it since we decided to do it on the podcast, and I was like, maybe this wasn't a good idea for like right now in Ben's life. I don't know.
It's great.
This was an accident.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Well, because when something big happens and changes in your life, your dreams change if you're paying any attention to them. Yeah. And Eraserhead is like a supplemental dream. It's like a supplement to my dream life, which is a really great. It's like a great gift that David Lynch has given me from 40 years ago. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But hey, what happens next? Speaking of dreams. I think the rest of the movie is a dream.
Yeah, it seems...
I think after about the point in the plot that we got to, after Mary leaves and he gives the baby its treatment, for whatever sickness it seems to have, I think the rest of the movie is pretty much a dream.
I'm thinking of a few... So when he has his encounter with the first encounter, well, I guess the second now, with the girl across the hall, do you think he actually sleeps with her, or do you think that's part of a dream?
I think that's a dream. I think that's a fantasy that he's having. It's the little worm inside of the little display case is Henry's flaccid penis, right? It's the little representative of his sexuality that he has, and because it is in the room, it's with him, right? He's thinking about sex, and the woman across the hall represents that unbridled, consequence-free sexuality that Henry is dreaming of at this point.
That makes it worth mentioning that the girl across the hall is very pretty, and even when, in the beginning of the movie, when she first speaks to him to tell him that Mary called, she's like wearing like a bathrobe that she's only holding it shut. It's not even tied. It's a very like representation of sexuality.
She's clearly a sexual object for Henry. Not in terms of the movie. In terms of the movie, there's more going on with her than that. But I even think that the way we see her in the film is colored by Henry's perception of her, right? Like, who knows what reality really is in Eraserhead? But she's a sexual object for Henry to lust after.
So, I have to mention that when she comes over and there's the scene where we'll say that he dreams about having sex with her.
It's ambiguous. It's very much not clear whether or not it's a dream. I interpret it as a dream.
The one part of the movie that still really bothers me is he's trying to like seduce her, and she's finally in his apartment. It seems like
and she seems to be trying to seduce him.
She invites herself in, and I'm locked out, and it's really late. Can I just stay here?
Yeah,
and
a ridiculous pretext to get into someone's apartment.
But his baby starts whining, and he like firmly grasps its face to keep it quiet.
Yeah, he shuts its mouth.
For some reason, like that is the last thing in this movie that I've watched this movie a few times now. That's the thing right there where I'm just like, fuck, every time.
That's the thing, not the scissor killing.
No, that's fine.
So the scissor killing is perfectly natural reaction.
The scissor killing is, above all else, a marvel of special effects that I could just watch over and over just for the sheer... that is fucking terrifying.
It hurts
that
me.
looks like a real
watch.
thing happening.
Yeah.
And so I can... And that's kind of like when people, I say when people, but when I think edgy teenagers are looking for edgy movies to watch, that's probably like the pinnacle of like, this is the fucked up part about this movie.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, for me, takes away from it. I think that at that point, it's so violent and hard to watch that it becomes kind of like a challenge, like a marathon to watch it. But for some reason, just seeing this whimpering child and Henry muffling its mouth and suffocating it and trying to push away its existence just so he can sleep with this cute girl across the hall, that really... There's a weird sex versus shame thing that, in general, is very interesting to me. And I love how that plays out in American culture. Like there are a lot of things that are, I mean, sidebar, there used to be, I'm pretty sure it's still a site, but there used to be a pornographic website that I would go to, and then I stopped going to it because videos started to be all like taboo, like weird, like sister brother, and I'm just like, no, I'm cool.
It's so fucking crazy how prominent that shit is.
Like, I am well adjusted enough that my shame, I'm not in the shame realm. Like
stepmother and not brother.
Yeah. So I'm
like that, and it's like weird. No, fucking don't at me about this. All right, everybody. It's like that. It's weird incest stuff, and it's like racial stuff. Is huge right now as well, and like racial stuff from other countries. Like Indians have this weird idea about this certain group of people, and they always show up on fucking porn websites.
I just think that American culture, I you know what, it's not even American, because I know that every culture deals with this in its own ways, but there's just this weird gray area of sex and shame that kind of, if you go to the weird areas of the internet, it pops up in strange ways.
Oh, sexual fantasies are such a deeply personal thing. And then to have, like, the magic box that we each have in our house be able to say, like, you got some fantasies? Yeah. Why don't you turn those fantasies into words and type them into this here search bar, and I'll pull something up for you.
And that's
then the fantasy develops and gets stranger. And
it's just this weird embrace of acceptance from your computer which thankfully for me, I say it's because I'm well adjusted, maybe I'm just not into that, but at that point I'm like, I'm good.
you recognize there's no like frog in a boiling pot of water element for you.
It's just like, okay. And but that part of this movie is just, it really that's hard for me to just watch a baby be smothered so he can try to get laid by this cute girl across the hall.
The baby is his responsibility, and he is silencing his responsibility to enjoy another moment of temporary pleasure.
And so that, I'm looking at the little synopsis here.
Well, they are making love in the bed, and she's like freaking out because she's looking at the baby in the dream, which I guess makes it Henry's fear of what she would think of him while they were in the bed, and they like sink into the pool of white water, and her hair is floating on the top in a way that strikes me, and I'm not sure why. That's one of the images that I don't understand why it is the way it is. Oh, and then what goes on after that?
That is when Spencer has the dream of being decapitated.
He goes into the radiator. He's on the radiator stage.
So I can't remember exactly when this happens, but Can I just, like, mention that I think that little song that girl sings is, like, the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
In
like,
Heaven is a really incredible song.
I'm, like, obsessed with it. And I love that it's only, like, a minute long, so I can just listen to it, like, 5 times.
Nah, dude. Nah, don't do that. That's no good. That's no good, man.
Not a good thing, man.
You can't do that to yourself.
Edit that out. Don't tell anyone you do that, and then
Please.
stop doing it.
Anybody out there, if you're listening to In Heaven on repeat, don't do that to yourself. We don't do that.
I just think it's beautiful, and I think
it is beautiful.
It's just juxtaposed. It's put so well against the idea of, like, this woman is just very cheerful and bright and cute and insignificant in your entertainment, and then she just sings this really beautiful piece very quickly. It's very short.
In Heaven, everything is fine. Repeat 3 times, and then say, "You've got your good things, and I've got mine."
And it's just such a charming, like, oh wow, it's like a warm bath in this fucking awful movie. And then
you can see why it's very enticing to Henry at that point.
Yeah, and so I feel like for a lot of what follows this, is it just gets so surreal that I even have a hard time, like, with the dream.
I have a pretty solid sequence of events because everything follows very naturally.
Walk me
all right.
through this.
So the dream begins. Henry, I believe he starts on the stage, right? And then the fucking tree that he has on his nightstand that's in a pile of dirt with no pot around it, wheels out onto the stage, right?
Yep.
And it starts to bleed like the chicken bled at the beginning at the X family's house. Henry goes behind this little screen, and his head pops off, right? And there's nothing there. Well, his head pops off and a penis flies out. It actually appears that a penis pushes his head off his body, if I remember correctly. I might be mixing that up. It might be head pops off and then penis pops out for like 3 frames. It's a very short shot of a dick flying out of his head.
I didn't even notice.
Flying out of his neck hole, right? And then he starts to twist the dowel on the little screen that he's behind. There's a shot of Henry's head on the pool of blood in the middle of the stage, and it falls through, or it almost appears to be pulled through because it's very sudden.
Yep.
Falls down into this.
Is this before? Because at one point when he loses his head, his baby's head.
Oh, his baby's head comes out, right?
Yep.
The penis comes out, but then the penis is gone in the next shot, and then his baby's head comes out and starts to cry.
Yeah.
Right? And while the baby's head is crying, something else might happen. I'm not sure. But anyway, long story short, the Henry's head falls through the pool of blood and falls into this abandoned lot where there's a homeless man watching it. And then this kid runs up. The top of Henry's head falls off, and the kid pulls Henry's head sans top and carries it to a building where he presents it to the owner of the building. They take it into the back. A man who appears to be operating some kind of machine takes a core of Henry's brain out, puts it into a little hole, which then makes perfect little erasers out of it that gets put onto the ends of the pencils, right? And the guy's line is like, "It's okay."
Yeah.
Again, one of my other favorite line readings in the whole movie. It's okay.
So,
and that's the dream, right? Is there anything else that sticks out that I missed?
That's about the dream, and I'm honestly, I would love your interpretation of what that means, because even now, I'm just like, that is fucking weird.
Interpretation comes later, man. But I think everything does make sense in it. I can't necessarily give an articulated description of what each symbol is.
Sure.
But I can tell you, because that's like the biggest crisis moment for Henry. The dream is the first time Henry realizes that he can do what he does at the end of the movie. So let's get to what he does at the end of the movie. He wakes up from the dream.
And this is when shit gets real for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
He kind of walks out into the hallway, and I think at this point he is committed, like, man, fuck this baby. I'm going to go fucking meet up with the girl across the hallway.
I'm going to go live out my dreams.
And
we skipped a whole fucking scene in the dream, is when he's in bed and Mary's back and she's like making mouth noises and rubbing her eyes and it's like squeaking. And then he starts pulling out these he starts pulling fetuses out.
And she's very wet. She's
Out
very,
of
like,
her.
sweaty.
She's soaked. And he starts pulling these fetuses. And it's ambiguous, but it looks like he's actually reaching into her and pulling them out. That's the effect that I got. I mean, maybe I'm totally off base and a fucking weirdo for thinking that.
No, I think...
But he grabs them out and throws them against the wall, and there's this great slow motion shot of it flying at the wall and just bursting perfectly into the white fluid. And it's the dream of infidelity, I think. I
love that because I think it's the linchpin with Mary, because you just have this, like, this is not going to stop. This is not going to get better. There are going to be more of these fucking things. And it's just over and over and over. And she is gross and, like, you don't love her. Like, And it's... Now that we have talked about that, I actually do think that it makes a lot of sense that in whatever reality the way that we perceive the girl across the hall, I think that is through Spencer's... his eye, because Mary is a cute girl, and by the time we stop seeing her, that's what we see her as. I think that is also through Henry's eye, and her eyes are all gross and sweaty, and she's dropping fetuses everywhere. Holy fuck.
Oh my god. And then there's another part of the dream where he looks into the little cupboard where he put the worm, and the worm goes on this little, like, journey into the planet that we saw at the beginning, and goes into the holes and grows. And I believe that it's fucking... I don't even remember what the sequence of events of that is, but that's before the stage in the radiator with the head popping off and everything. I think it might be right before the dream of him having sex with the woman across the hall, because that represents the reawakening of his sexuality. And that just reminded me, but one of the things that I think is so crazy about this movie is that where it took so long to get made, lots of things changed throughout the development of this movie. I had seen in one interview, David Lynch said that all the scenes with the girl in the radiator, like, that was pretty much towards the end of making the movie. He was like, oh, I should do that. And then that became the movie. And David Lynch knows how to do stop animation. Mm-hmm. And so he has that one scene that with the sperm that is stop animation. And at one point when he had run out of money, his plan was to just, like, make a fake Henry. And film the rest.
And, like, just do the rest with stop animation. Which... I'm
so glad he didn't do that.
I'm glad that he was able to finish the film.
Yeah. That seems to have been at his lowest moment. Was like, fucking, I can just do this myself. I don't know.
So...
Anyway.
At this point, Henry wakes up from his dream about being turned into erasers. Mm-hmm. Mary's gone. And I think at this point he's kind of hit, like, no, I'm going for the girl across the hall. Mary's gone. I don't want this fucking baby. And I've, in his eyes, I've tried to take care of it. It's not getting any better. Fuck this. And sees, like, his ultimate nightmare come true. The girl across the hall is, like, being groped by and, getting ready to have sex with this gross guy.
This despicable man who doesn't even look human. Like, is he listed in the credits? He might be a stop-motion puppet.
He just has, like, weird, like, crusty cheeks, and his hair is also slicked back.
He's just, like...
It's just, ugh. And she's just embracing him. And I think it's just, like, the ultimate rejection for Henry.
And then he goes back into the room, and the baby starts laughing at him.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, the baby laughs at him for a couple minutes. And at some point, maybe before he sees the woman in the hall, he looks out the window, which doesn't have bricks on it anymore, and he witnesses a brutal murder. Like, it's conveyed pretty impressionistically from, like, an unusual angle, so you don't see details. But someone fucking kills someone else, like, hardcore. That's a terrible way to describe the tragedy of death. Like, I described it like perfect. A fucking video game. Yes. It's fucking hardcore.
Hardcore murder right there.
Someone performs an elemental murder on someone else. It just, like, the classic murder. Chases them down, kills them. So then, after all that, Henry gets a pair of scissors, and he cuts open the cloth. He cuts open the egg casing
has been swaddling his little newborn.
Yeah, that's been swaddling the baby.
And as it turns out, the baby has been crying because it has been in immense pain its entire life. It has no body.
Yeah.
It's just organs
inside of this,
swaddled, connected to this head.
Yeah.
And
as he's cutting the bandages open, the baby starts to like make a noise we haven't heard yet.
Yeah.
Right? The baby is clearly not enjoying this.
And for me, it's just like, that is this point where like you truly feel awful for this little creature. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is how one of the ways it becomes most effective as a horror movie, because you just like don't want to see such a bad thing happen. This movie it's a horror movie for
Absolutely.
sure.
It's body horror. Yeah.
But when I watched it the first time, I was so surprised at the lack of like traditional horror elements, and just I'd never been scared in that way. But you just feel so bad, and this little baby's in pain, and it's, you know, organs are just strewn out, and
he stabs it.
Yeah,
and blood comes flying out of its mouth all over its face. It makes me really, it's awful.
It's really
awful
hard
to watch.
And so with that, do you view that as more of like, from Henry's perspective, is that an act of pity, or is that like, I'm fucking done with this?
It's the second one. It's an act of selfishness.
You think so?
Yeah. It's an act of selfishness and of pushing away of responsibility.
I was curious about that, because initially, I think just through like projection, I had viewed it as like, you know, a sense of like doing what I have to do because this is just not right for this kid. But as I have watched it a few times and kind of seen that, you know, Henry is like not a good guy.
Henry's like really bad.
At first, when I watched it, he's kind of like, it's kind of ambiguous, I feel like, and you kind of see that he's just this plain guy that's been kind of tossed into this situation that he doesn't want to be in. And I think when you first watch it, maybe this is something I shouldn't say, because maybe this is just like, no, Curt, that's just you. But I think that it's easy to see yourself in Henry.
Oh, absolutely. It's way too easy.
Okay, good.
I think any man who says that they don't see a little bit of themselves in Henry, at least, maybe a lot, is lying to himself.
And so at first I viewed it as just this like act of pity, but then the more you watch it, you're like, man, Henry's kind of a dick, and really not making an attempt at being, you know, a father or a husband. It's kind of like, it's hard. It's just, it seems like, he's just like, no, I'm done. This is fucking gross. Like,
well, he's frustrated at the baby. Well, the other thing that happens is when he's looking at the woman in the hallway, there's one quick shot where it cuts back to him, and his head has been replaced by the baby's head, just like in the dream.
Yeah.
He begins to identify his own failure as a man with the baby, and that's when he kills it.
And so at this point, we're like coming into the tail end of the movie.
Yeah,
here.
we're in the final minutes.
So everything in the room starts to explode. Lights start flashing, and
there's electricity sparking out. The baby's head goes far away from its body into the shadows.
Yeah. The body fills up with Floam. Nickelodeon Floam.
And Henry's just kind of cowering by the lamp the whole time, and suddenly the baby's head is huge. And the lights are flashing on and off, and the baby's head is moving around the apartment. Yeah.
And we cut to a shot who we haven't seen since the beginning of the film, the man in the planet, who has clearly lost control of all this machinery. There's sparks flying.
He's desperately trying to move the lever back to where it started. Yeah. But it's taking a toll on him and probably killing him.
And so that fucking great shot, though, of Henry's head with the eraser shavings that just like...
Yeah. Yep. Because that's the end of the dream. That's what brings him back into the waking world. Is the man tests the eraser, says it's okay, and then takes all the shavings, this massive comedic pile of shavings, and just flits them off. These shavings that used to be Henry's brain are now completely particulated, They no longer form any kind of coherent whole, and they're just floating through. And then, yes, right at the end, after the murder of the baby, we see the shavings again floating behind Henry's head with such a look of sheer terror on Henry's face.
And I mean, at this point, Henry just kind of gives up and retreats to the radiator.
Yeah,
and it's so sad, and kind of, and I feel bad for Henry in a way. Like,
I don't.
Not because of any, like, he completely has put himself in the situation that he's in, but there's just this weird, like, you know, sad, welcoming embrace from the lady in the radiator. She hugs him, and then just, like, there's, like, white light and just, like, a crescendo of, like, a squealing noise.
Yeah,
and
I believe the final image that we see is Henry's face, and there's kind of a look of peace on his face. The woman in the radiator is happy.
Yeah.
And Henry's face is, like, just tired and neutral. But he, I don't know. I don't even know how to describe the facial expression that he has. It's a great image to end the movie on.
And it does abruptly just whoosh, like, it just cuts. I'm like,
yeah,
presented
credits
by David Lynch.
David Lynch did this to you, is what the credits should have said.
And that's it.
That's Eraserhead.
Man.
See you next week.
Yeah. I've watched this movie a lot, and it's still just like...
Dozens of times, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, every time it's more. Now, I've seen this movie 47 times, and I can tell you, it's pretty good.
It's okay.
I don't know, I just really... I've seen, as far as the other David Lynch movies, I've seen Elephant Man, and I haven't seen anything else.
Yep.
So, this is the first part of our, you know, we did our Tarantino series. We did Texorcism. Have we done any others? Any other big series?
No, I don't think so. I think maybe one. Well, the closest other thing that we did was Lil Wayne.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a 2-episode short series with one The Carter in each one, and I actually really liked those as well. I think those fit well alongside the Tarantino and Texorcism episodes. This is completely off the topic.
That's fine.
Of
So,
Eraserhead.
But we're moving in. David Lynch is going to be our next kind of series that we're looking at. We're going to be looking at more of his movies.
And what a start.
Yeah. Just
what a start to a film career.
You might even ask, where do you go from here?
Uh-huh.
Like, how can you keep doing this?
Yeah.
So next week we're going to talk about The Elephant Man.
Mm-hmm. But we're not done with Eraserhead.
Yeah, I was going to say we need our
Fuck
final thoughts on.
We need to delve into the symbology, man. We haven't talked nearly enough about all the individual things in this. For instance, let's talk about the dream.
Sure.
All right, the thing that you wanted me to kind of give my reading of the dream. The baby represents Henry's responsibility, and the whole time Henry is in the apartment, he's thinking to himself, how can I remove this? And in a way, the dream gives him permission. The dream says, it's okay. You don't have to use your brain just to create. You can also use your brain to erase pieces of the world. The baby to Henry represents responsibility, but not just responsibility to take care of the baby. It's also responsibility to take care of himself in a way that he would want the baby to be taken care of, right? So and it represents the future in a way as well, because every baby represents the future, but it's also unformed. The future has not come yet. The baby is not done growing. It came out prematurely. That's unexpected. That's not what you want to happen. Nobody who's going through a pregnancy thinks like, boy, I just can't wait to get that baby. Can we bring it out a few months early?
Yeah.
So in the dream, when they take the piece of Henry's brain and turn it into an eraser, and it says like, look, you can just, one of your options that you have, instead of having to move forward in a productive way, is you can just erase it. You can just get rid of this. You have that capability. And that's why he sees the murder out the window as well. That murder it's so pure and elemental as a murder that I tend to think of that as Cain and Abel. It's the first murder.
Yeah.
It's the essence of murder. And that Cain and Abel is a similar way. Cain sees something that he doesn't like in the world. He sees kind of an exhortation to act better in the world, and he says, "Nah, fuck that. I'm gonna take one look at my ideal, which is Abel, my brother, who's having blessings, laid upon him, and I'm gonna say I'm not gonna use that information to change myself. I'm going to use that information to get bitter and angry at the world, and I'm going to destroy the thing that makes me feel that way. I'm going to erase Abel from the world." In a similar way, Henry erases his own ideal. Yeah, hey, that's Eraserhead, folks.
So, I'm curious, do you look at as far as an ending for this, what do you think has happened to Henry as a result of this?
Well, he's definitely committed infanticide. He's committed, I don't know, I don't want to get political in this or anything, but I think he's committed what is as close as we can get to an unforgivable crime.
Yeah.
Something that he acted in a moment of pure selfishness. But if I was Mary, and again, it's weird for me because now I actually have a baby to think about.
Yeah.
It's no longer abstract to me to think about what it would be like for someone to kill my baby.
Yeah.
And it's literally the worst thing I can think of. There's nothing that scares me more than that. And it's not even close. It's the idea of my child dying is in a stratosphere of its own. In a way, it encompasses all other fears, because now it's so much bigger than any other fear that it makes other fears insignificant.
Yeah.
So yeah, unforgivable crime. So whether or not Henry actually kills himself at the end of this movie, I think is immaterial, because he's killed his own future. Even if he does live at the end, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He's committed a crime against himself and his family and the world that he lives in. In a way, the world that Eraserhead takes place in is a world that is challenging anyone to feel hopeful ever. And what Henry does is receive that challenge and fucking firmly say, "Nah, I don't." But the world of Eraserhead is not so different from our own world in that way. The world is always challenging through laying suffering randomly upon people. The world is always challenging you to say, like, "Nope, I'm gonna wake up again, and I'm gonna approach the day as though things will be okay." And some people say, "Yeah, things are gonna be okay," and some people say, "No, it would be better. There is so much suffering in the world that it would be better if the world didn't exist." That's the satanic argument, right? That's what the devil says. The devil says things are so bad here that what's the argument for there even being a point to any of this? It's nihilism. Dancing on the line of nihilism, right?
Part two.
It's the nihilistic argument.
I like to wake up and say, today is going to happen.
Nothing I can do.
It's going to be good or bad. Actually, it's not even going to be good or bad. It's just going to happen. And some good things will happen, and some bad things will happen. Hopefully the bad ones don't happen to me.
That's a prayer. You open every day with a prayer. Yeah.
And the worst part is I fall back on, like, you know what? We're not going down this road tonight.
What are your thoughts on Henry at the end of Eraserhead? Where do you think he ends up?
I was wondering, like, does this mean if he's used his brain to erase this? And the way I look at it, I guess, is that he has used his whole brain to erase this thing that has happened. Mm. And I don't know if it means that he is dead now in a way, or if retreating to the radiator just means that he's just gone insane.
He no longer has a future.
He just can't see beyond the trivial entertainment of what he wants to see now.
Yeah. Whether or not his body is dead, his soul is certainly dead.
And now that we've talked about it, I think the best way to look at it is it doesn't matter because the baby is dead. Like, and I think that I feel a lot better. I wish I had not watched this movie like 80 times before we had this conversation, because that had kind of been like, you know, it's such a surreal movie that with ambiguous actions that I was kind of just like, I wonder what happened to Henry. Like, I wonder what the outcome of that was. And I'm glad that now I have this. It doesn't matter because the baby is dead, and that was the symbol of, that was the future. That was, you know, hope and life. And if it were true that this wasteland became like that in the course of 30 years, it could probably undo it in the course of that child's life, and everybody in that world has chosen to not take that action. Yeah. I like this movie, though.
I love it, man. It's another one of those movies that I can't recommend anybody watch.
I think everybody should watch it.
I think everybody.
That's not true.
I think it is worth watching if you're interested in cinema, because it'll make you think about cinema in a different way.
If you are interested in the making of movies, or you are challenging yourself to watch something fucked up, Eraserhead can scratch that itch.
Or like something complicated.
Yeah.
If you want to watch something that can actually stand up to some scrutiny, and that is worth watching in an analytic way, but that is so purely symbolic that if you're going to analyze any of it, you kind of have to get into the symbology of it. There's no way not to. Like, we could cut a pretty good plot synopsis out of our discussion of this movie, and it's incomprehensible.
Do you think this movie is pretentious at all?
No. Or do we want to talk about... Because there are people that say... There are people out there, Curtis.
There are at least one.
There's at least one person out there that says that David Lynch's films, and especially Eraserhead, have no underlying meaning, that they're just like a big practical joke that David Lynch plays, that there's nothing there, and that it's not worth trying to analyze them because there is nothing there. I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that is the case. I do wonder sometimes choices that get made. And I don't want to say anything bad about Eraserhead because I love this movie. But I did, you know, once I was thinking about that, I was wondering if when independent movies are made, you know, I don't want to say Eraserhead does this. I want to say probably movies do this because of Eraserhead. But, like, for a lot of independently made movies, shooting in black and white is an artistic choice. Or having weird things that stick out that you can't describe are there as this to inject something that makes you go, ooh, I bet that means something, when it doesn't. I don't think that's the case for Eraserhead, but and it's almost at the point where Eraserhead is so old at this point, like, it's like when you watch, like, I don't know, I'm looking at Jaws, so I'll use that as an example. Like, you watch a movie that's so iconic that the tropes that are in it were not tropes when they did it, because they were, like, the first one to do it. And I think that's kind of how I feel about Eraserhead. I think anything that could be argued as this was done to be artsy, people do that to be artsy because Eraserhead did it. I think that's probably where I fall on it. So that's Eraserhead. You know, I actually really liked it when we did our movie review and we talked about the movie. We talked about what happened in the movie. That was cool.
Eraserhead occupies a permanent space in my brain now.
Yeah, you can't unsee that.
Yeah, and it pops up at different times, especially the baby.
Yeah. I see that baby a lot.
I see the
close
baby
my eyes
all the time. I can't the baby's right next to you, Curtis.
Unsee that Curtis, you're the baby.
Curtis, the baby's head is popping out of your neck.
So yeah, that's Eraserhead. We're gonna wrap this up. We're right at where we want to be.
How long have we talked?
This is an hour and a half right here.
Nice. Perfect.
And maybe with even a couple minutes in the beginning of not show stuff.
Yeah.
So next week we're going to be talking about The Elephant Man.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if Eraserhead isn't your thing, give Elephant Man a shot.
Definitely.
Because it is a drastically different film.
It's a biopic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And great movie. I before I knew we were going to be doing our Lynch thing, I bought it, and it was fantastic. So we'll be talking about that next week. You guys know the deal. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CurtCake5K. You can follow Ben and Curt Till It Hurts on Twitter at Ben_and_Curt. You can listen to Ben and Curt on YouTube. You can listen to Ben and Curt Till It Hurts. Also, Ben and Curt. Shit. Oh, blew it. On
Start it over. Erase this whole episode.
We'll start the episode over. I'll play the theme music. You can follow Black Gold Podcast and Ben and Curt Till It Hurts on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also stream it from Buzzsprout.com. And thanks for listening. Write us some of those iTunes reviews. I like getting those.
We've got 7 ratings on iTunes.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I think we're at a solid 5 stars right now. So,
woo!
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
I'm going to go give
reviewed.
us a 5-star rating, so you guys should too. All right, we'll be back next week. Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
Bye.